There's a lot of talk, and there is video that we'll share with you and punditry across the punditry verse saying the Democrats don't understand the people anymore. The Democrats don't understand the working class. The Republicans have been the party of the working class. I challenge that on the facts. I mean, there's no disputing the result of the election. And I will get to some of the reasons I challenge it. I mean, you know, you can look at the capping of insulin. You can look at the negotiation on drug prices. You can look at the fact that the president of the United States walked a picket line with union members in Detroit, and he's up against a guy who is campaigning with a billionaire who is the richest man in the world and who is notorious for breaking unions. Still, this other guy somehow connected with the people more than did Joe Biden and the Democrats. And they turned on the Democrats in such a way that they really repudiated a lot of these democratic reforms, even though you can look at them as the child care tax credit. I mean, these are things that absolutely touch people. They absolutely help people. The Republicans want to roll all that back, and that's not just theoretical. You can see what Republicans voted against that stuff I just mentioned, against negotiating drug prices, against a cap on insulin, against child care tax credits. So we know it to be the case. But I think this moment in America has to do with the ability to get the word out and also how you digest a lot of this information siloing as well. So there's all of that in the background. And we'll talk more about it, and I get it. And the Democrats, I told you, the day after the election, really have to come clean with the fact that they don't connect with the people on some level, or they have to express their message in a much better way. But I really think they may need, you know, a true house cleaning from the standpoint of how they prosecute their messages, prosecute their campaigns, and choose their candidates. But now to issue one. Why is Donald Trump still in the American political system? He shouldn't be. He is because of one man, Merrick Garland. If Merrick Garland hadn't slow-walked charges against Donald Trump for 2 years, Merrick Garland delayed. The only reason Merrick Garland even brought charges toward Donald Trump was an investigation, is where it started with Jack Smith, of course, and then ultimately charges, is because of what? The January 6th committee. It was so undeniable that even Merrick Garland, even the tepid, spineless Merrick Garland, who is an embarrassment to the Justice Department, even he couldn't sit back and let that go. The January 6th committee's investigation and public hearings effectively forced Garland to investigate Trump, and eventually Smith's appointed. And again, that's 2 years after the incitement of a riot at the Capitol. Trump's loss in 2020, and then everything that we found out about him jacking documents, him actively hiding documents, I mean, all of the things that Trump was guilty of necessitated an immediate probe from the Justice Department, and I'm leaving out January 6th. The guy engineered a coup, and you didn't even initiate an investigation? And we kept hearing, well, he's investigating, he's getting... BS. It should be done right away. It's absolutely insane that this man, Merrick Garland, is the reason that we had Donald Trump.
Why do you think he didn't do it right away? Why didn't he move faster? What was
because
the point?
he's a tepid institutionalist. He didn't want the appearance of the Justice Department investigating a political foe. So even as Donald Trump cries about the fact that they've turned the Justice Department against me and these are politically motivated prosecutions, the reality is just the opposite. Donald Trump was the beneficiary of one of the greatest gifts from the Justice Department that any American has ever gotten. It is absolutely why we have ended up here. The risk that they ran, the gamble that they took, was all about, we don't want the appearance of politics, and that's the gamble we all lost, and the risk that we've now seen was horribly fatal if you look at the likely narratives from here. A lot of Garland defenders say that they were following a standard kind of bottom-up investigative effort where they prosecute the rioters first and then they get up to the kingpin. I mean, it just doesn't work that way. When there are large overlapping groups legally in big investigations, they try to get to the top first. So the Justice Department really dropped the ball on this, but it was Merrick Garland. It really is Merrick Garland. It's his Justice Department. You could have prosecuted all those people who charged the Capitol at the same time that you investigated Trump and put your case together for him.
If President Biden appointed him, as Stephen McCarthy reminds us here in the chat, then wouldn't it be President Biden's fault that we have a President-elect Trump?
Sure. And I think that you can absolutely lay some of the blame there. Mm-hmm. But I make the Attorney General the real guy on this. But you're absolutely right. Of course, the trail of breadcrumbs does go back to Joe Biden. And Joe Biden is the ultimate institutionalist. It's what I didn't like about him. I've never liked him because, and he surprised me, as I've said on the show many times. I think he had a successful presidency in many of the ways that I've detailed here, and he had transformational legislation when it came to his infrastructure bill. There's a lot of that stuff that I mentioned that was in the infrastructure bill. But I really have to say that you can't count on the GOP. Of course, Mitch McConnell and the Senate Republicans, they could have convicted Trump. After the second impeachment, which laid out all the reasons that this guy should be nowhere near Washington, they could have easily prevented him from running again for the presidency. And then you would have had Nikki Haley versus whomever, Biden with the diminished capacity, or you would have had Kamala Harris. But the greatest rehabilitation of a reputation in history is the rehab on reputation that Donald Trump had organized and executed. Between the time that he left Washington and now, it's amazing. But he would not be around without Merrick Garland sleeping. And again, if you want to go back, you can go to the Senate Republicans. I mean, they really could have stood up and said, hey, dude, we're with you on a lot of this stuff, but you can't, turn an angry mob on this great governmental body and get away with it. He might have been better on the Supreme Court. I'm just saying, good thing he didn't become a Supreme Court justice. He might have been better. He'd probably be one of the more even-handed Supreme Court justices. But Trump's world of grievance, the way he turned indictments into political wins, the way he sold successfully, I'd have to say, his aggrieved party born anger at those prosecutions into political wins, it was extraordinary. And so people rallied around him. And, all of his, I think, legal setbacks just occurred way too late in the game. And fundamentally, Merrick Garland let it happen. Let it happen. I'm just looking at the comments
Well,
as well.
a lot of people want presidential immunity clause to be kicked into effect. I saw one person said, "Why can't Biden just throw Trump in jail?"
Yeah,
Democrats don't do that. We're not
that's
that.
exactly right.
Yeah.
And the Republicans know the Democrats don't do that. I mean,
Yeah.
it's just not the party that does that. I mean,
But if it was Trump that had the presidential immunity and he was looking around, who do you think would be in the lockup?
I don't know even that they're in the lockup. I think David Katz made a great point yesterday. He's our former federal prosecutor who comes in on Thursdays. If you haven't heard him, he's terrific. And he made the point that, when the government goes after you in court, or it goes after you in any way, but generally you end up in court, even for taxes or whatever, they can bankrupt you. The government, with limitless funds, they can bankrupt you. And so they never have to put you in jail. They can make it worse than jail. I mean, really, they can ruin your life. You can lose your family, your house, everything, defending yourself against the government. As soon as SCOTUS ruled on presidential immunity, Biden should have issued an executive order saying felons can't run for president, said Dave. Yeah, I don't think, again, I think these are, I told you in my movie, after that Supreme Court decision, he declares, Biden does, or the president in my movie declares the Supreme Court justices enemies of the state, has them arrested. That's the way, a B movie ends. Biden, with presidential immunity, doesn't have the power to issue an executive order to then overturn the scenario that was just suggested. Oh my God, I totally agree about Garland, and Biden only appointed him because he unfairly missed out on the Supreme Court appointment. But add McConnell to the list for refusing to go ahead with Garland's appointment, Elizabeth Musto. Yeah, that's a really interesting point that we haven't mentioned that. Elizabeth is saying, hey, Garland was nominated to the Supreme Court. They wouldn't even, this is under Obama, of course, they wouldn't even take a meeting on that. And that led Biden to, overcorrect by making him attorney general. It was like a make good. I think there's a lot to that. And that's the kind of guy Biden is. He's like, hey, don't worry, buddy. I got you. You deserve that Supreme Court seat. You're going to be my attorney general. And then, again, Garland just sleeps on everything. So the Supreme Court will only become more emboldened and only be more GOP in the next 4 years. So I think at the end of it all, you can blame Merrick Garland for, at least once Biden had ascended to the presidency, for sleeping on the case against Donald Trump for 2 years. And I understand Trump kills the clock and delays and appeals, but had you had 4 years to pursue it, it would have definitely been a different outcome. And Trump, I think, would have not survived it. Obviously, if you go back in time just even a few months prior to the Biden administration, McConnell and the Senate, they permitted Trump to live on. And now, look at those guys. If they're not absolute Trump loyalists, Trump will crush them like a bug. Phil Smith said Garland had no business being the AG. Soft lefties don't do a good job at prosecuting the rule of law effectively. You know what? I hate to say it, but I kind of agree with that. So, and in polling, a huge swath of the public, somewhere around 60%, wanted Trump to stand trial this year in the 2020 election subversion case. Before the Supreme Court weighed in, an even larger portion of Americans, somewhere around 70%, rejected the idea that presidents should be immune from prosecution for alleged crimes that they commit while in office. This is from Politico. Again, the polling reflects that the public very much had an appetite to see Trump pay a price for what he'd done. This is a president, the incoming president, who concocted a scheme, a coup scheme, to overturn an election with fake electors and then ultimately a violent mob.
And he's going to skate. He's no justice, no consequences.
And his Supreme Court, his hand-picked Supreme Court, gave him the immunity grounds this year that then essentially has ushered in a whole new era of criminal immunity for Donald Trump. And that immunity, no basis really in law. And when they did that, they had to go figure out other ways to prosecute on the January 6 charges and on the coup charges. And then ultimately, of course, it's all moot because Donald Trump wins the election. So again, it's all bad. And there may be, as I always say, the trail of breadcrumbs back to Joe Biden, back to Mitch McConnell. But ultimately, the final check, the final firewall was Merrick Garland. And for me, he really didn't step up in any way. And when you look at Donald Trump, as I said earlier, this guy who claimed the justice system has turned on him for political reasons, I believe he was the beneficiary of one of the greatest gifts from the Justice Department that any American could ever get. And it turned into the greatest political reversal of fortune in American history. He will be the next president of the United States.
Hi, it's Mark, and I thought that was great. Hit the notification bell, you'll know whenever there's a new video being dropped, and please subscribe to our channel to help us save the universe.